We all make mistakes, and if you aren't making mistakes, then you probably aren't learning. However, there are some mistakes that are just plain bad, and I want you to simply avoid them. So I've compiled 10 mistakes that are some of the worst mistakes made by new screenwriters with the hope of helping you not make them. Number 1, writing the wrong thing. Now, when you're a new writer, you want to be writing things that help you learn the craft, help you begin to find your writing voice, and if you manage to catch lightning in a bottle, you could get some attention with that script. Yet one of the best things to write when you're learning the craft is actually a spec script for a TV show that you like. Why? Well, because you don't have to do any of the heavy lifting of creating characters, crafting a world, layering in dynamics between all the characters. I mean, all that stuff is already done. You can literally just focus on trying to tell a good story that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And as a benefit, if the spec turns out to be any good, you can always use it as a writing sample as long as that show is current. A lot of new writers also write features, and features are another good thing to write, although now you're creating all the components you need. You got to create the characters and the world and all that stuff, and this is where it starts to get a little hairy because often the wrong screenplay is written. New writers think that they're just going to do the equivalent of a TV spec, but for a film. So they write a feature based on existing IP, a new Marvel film, Star Wars film, Star Trek, Harry Potter, Jason Bourne, whatever, take your pick. Okay, and all of those are bad. Now, I did make a video about things that you shouldn't write that I will link here, and this will help explain a lot of the things that you should stay away from. The main thing, though, is you need to keep in mind those 3 guidelines I mentioned. Write things that help you learn the craft, write things that help you find your voice, and write things that you could share with others if it ends up being any good. Now keep in mind, the first few scripts you write are probably not going to be any good. I mean, that's not to say that you can't revisit them later, because it's a story you love and you really believe in it. And if it's high concept enough, it might get some notice later on. But you need to approach your first few scripts as learning opportunities. And that plays into mistake number 2, rewriting your first screenplay 19 or more times. I mean, you believe in the story so much and you just keep revising. Holy cow, stop. I mean, one of the things you have to learn as a screenwriter is how to navigate the entire process of writing a script. You need to experience getting from beginning all the way to the end. But if you only work on one script over and over and over and over again, you never learn how to replicate the process of writing a script. You never learn the right process for you. And because it's your first screenplay, do you even know if the story is working? I mean, do you even know what tools you have available to tell the story? Are you shaping the emotional experience of the audience in the way that you want to shape it? My guess is, because it's your first script, you probably don't even know what all of those things are. So there's a high probability that you don't know how to fix them because you wouldn't know if they're broken. Screenwriting is a long game. I mean, selling one script for loads of money is just not how it works. You have to practice the craft, and that means all of the craft. From idea generation to outlining to scripting to revising, all of it, knowing when you're done. Now, once you've been screenwriting for a while and once you have a few scripts under your belt, if you want to hone your craft and transform yourself into a master storyteller, yeah, you might be interested in my Screenplay Navigator coaching program. But if you've only written one script, okay, that program is not for you. If you've written a few and you've been through the process a few times, but you want to learn to master it, to ask the right questions, okay, click on the Screenplay Navigator link below to learn more and to book a free call with me to see if it's right for you. But still, you've got to learn that screenwriting is a long game. You cannot just spend all your time rewriting your first script 19, 20, 27, 97 times. You can't do it. You got to get to the end and you got to move on. Mistake number 3, asking about how to get an agent. And this one is often paired with mistake number 4, asking about how to sell your script. There's so many new writers, they want to know these questions. How do I sell my script? How do I get an agent? So I'm going to talk about both of them here, although they are kind of 2 separate things. So we'll kind of talk about them together and then kind of separate them here a second. I wish, just me personally, I wish I could erase from our culture the notion that all you have to do to be a screenwriter is read a couple of books, come up with an idea that you think is good, write a screenplay, and Hollywood is going to clamor for it and pay you $1 million. I mean, that doesn't happen. And even in the spec script heyday of the 80s and early 90s, that only happened to established writers. It never happens to new writers, not ever. And this is especially true if you're trying to sell your first script that you've rewritten 19 times. I mean, sorry to bust your bubble there, Skippy, but it just don't work that way. When I taught screenwriting and filmmaking at a university, I would always get asked on the first day of class something along the lines of, how can I sell a script? Or how can I get an agent? And as a new writer, that is the way wrong question. Here's the truth that you don't want to hear, but that you need to hear. Part of your growth as a screenwriter will involve, at some point, interacting and being around other screenwriters, both aspiring screenwriters and successful screenwriters. And as your skill level improves, other writers who have sold things will begin to talk with you about how they got their break. And what you'll find is that no two writers do it the same way. And you'll have conversations with others who write things similar to you, and you'll start to figure out how to approach the right people and when is the right time to approach them. In other words, when it comes to selling your script, if you are investing yourself into learning the craft and interacting with other writers who are recognizing your ability as a writer, you will learn what you need to learn to sell your script when the time is right. So if you're having to ask, well, how do I sell my script? You aren't ready to sell your script. You will learn the information from others when you are ready. Now, are there things that you can do to move that along faster? Well, 100%. How do I sell my script is a question you won't have to ask though, because when your scripts are to the level they need to be, you will have learned what you need to learn to sell them. So it's not about learning how to ask to get an agent or how do I sell my script. It's learning about how to improve your craft and getting your craft to the point it needs to be faster so you can get to that point. And then very soon thereafter, we get to the agent question. How do I get an agent? Mostly because new writers think that to sell a script, you have to first get an agent. Nope. Agents aren't interested in you or your script until they know that others are interested enough to want to sign a check. I mean, most screenwriters don't secure an agent until after they've sold a script. So once you have a script that's hot on the market and people are reading it, you'll have agents and managers reach out to you. So keep first things first. Focus on learning to craft a well-told story. Do that. And if you can, then we can worry about the other stuff. And it tends to sort itself out anyway. One caveat here, I am not advocating that you be passive about it, that you just kind of like sit back and wait for people to come knocking at your door. That's not how it works either. You have to be active. You have to be marketing yourself as you are able, depending on where you're at. You have to actually send stuff out when it's ready, not before. Sometimes you get one shot, just one shot to impress someone. You've got an email of somebody and you're going to send it to them and you're like, I got one shot. So you better make sure that you don't mess it up and you are putting your best foot forward. Do you know that that script you have is the best script that you can write? And if you don't know, man, don't burn that bridge yet. Wait, just wait. Learn the craft. Get good at the craft. When other people are like, hey, this is really good. Okay, now's when you pull the trigger. Mistake number 5, not using screenwriting software. When I first started screenwriting, there were 2 or 3 screenwriting software packages available and all were a couple $100. So the first script that I wrote was in Microsoft Word and it was a total pain, but I did it. However, now in 2021, there are several free screenwriting software options available. There's simply no excuse to not be using screenwriting software. And then when you're ready to purchase a more robust software package, you can do that. I made a video about screenwriting software, which I will link here. So if you don't know where to start, at least watch that. But use software. Get used to working in it. Most of all the software, they're all fairly similar from one to another. So if you have one and then you get a different one, it's going to be fairly similar. Of course, there's always some different features. There's always that kind of stuff. The basics, though, they're generally the same. So if you're serious about the craft, get some software. And if you don't want to get software, even a free version, you should genuinely ask yourself if you're serious about being a screenwriter. Number 6, not taking the time to learn story. A lot of new writers think they can just jump in. I've watched lots of movies and TV shows. I know what a story is. And then they try to write something and it's a train wreck. They think it's good, but everyone else is like, this is just not that good. And the new writer throws their hands up with it. Well, you just don't get my genius kind of comment. Well, no, you haven't taken the time to learn story, to learn what it is, to learn what tools you have available to you, to learn what you can and can't do, what you should and shouldn't do. And frankly, writers that don't want to take the time to learn about story belittle the craft of screenwriting, acting like, well, anyone can do it. No, anyone can learn it. Anyone can practice it, anyone can get good at it, But not anyone can just pick it up and start doing it, because only the people who have taken the time to learn what a story is and isn't, to be able to articulate why a movie or TV show is actually good or bad, they're the ones who get it. And if you are serious about the craft, you have to learn what a story is. You have to learn what makes them work. I mean, if I were to ask you, what are 7 things that you absolutely must know about your story before you start writing it? Could you answer that question? And if not, you haven't taken the time to learn what a story is. And before you start commenting below, like, hey Jake, what are those 7 things? Ask yourself if you think that they're really 7. Maybe there's only 5. Maybe there's 10. Maybe there's more. The point is, do you know enough about story to figure it out yourself? I mean, yes, you can learn it, but if you've studied story and if you think about it, if you like break it down, especially if you've watched this channel for any length of time, you could figure out the pieces that you need. So if you want some homework, okay, if you want homework, like Jake, give me homework. Okay, try and figure out what are the pieces you absolutely have to know before you write a story. And if you want a little more help with this, linked below is the complete guide to story structure. And through the end of 2021, it's completely free, 100% free. But in January of 2022, it's going to be a little reworked. I'm doing some other things with it. It will not be free. So if you want the free version and a head start on learning story and how story works, there you go. Complete guide to story structure, link below. Mistake number 7, not reading screenplays. I mean, how can you say you're wanting to be a screenwriter if you aren't reading screenplays? When I was starting out, screenplays were hard to find, especially if you weren't in LA. But now you can find them online. Every awards season, all the screenplays are made available for any TV show or film that's nominated. There's websites that curate and host tons of scripts. I mean, if you want to find a script, there are a lot of ways to find them. And especially when you're starting out, you should be reading screenplays, lots of them. If you live near a university that has a film or screenwriting program, their library probably has some scripts on file. I mean, there's no excuse to not be reading screenplays. And you can learn a ton just by reading and seeing how others have written, especially if you are familiar with the film or TV show, because you'll remember how it turned out. You remember, oh, here's what happened. So then you start reading it. How did they write that? And you can compare what was written versus what was shown. And more importantly, what wasn't written. That can give you a lot of insight. Mistake number 8, not finishing a script, also known as starting lots of script and not finishing them. You know, a lot of new writers decide they're going to write a screenplay. They've got an idea, they're pretty sure they have a story, they have an interesting world, and so they begin their writing. And then they get 30 or so pages in, maybe 50, and you hit a wall. And you can't figure out how to keep going, and you think, I'm just a failure, I can't do this. Here's the thing, you have to get to the end. You have to, especially on your first script. It doesn't matter if the end is on page 70 or 153. Get to the end. Most aspiring screenwriters never even finish a draft of a script. Don't be them. Get to the end. It doesn't matter how good or bad it is. You will learn so much just by getting to the end. Again, part of being a screenwriter is learning to navigate the process of screenwriting. And you can't begin to learn how to do that until you know how to get to the end. I mean, how are you going to sustain a long-term writing career if you don't even know if you can get to the end of one single script? You have to get to the end, but it's more than that. You have to try and revise it at least once. And then you have to get to a point where you say, you know what? I'm done with that script. Otherwise, you're going to end up revising it 1997 times and never get anywhere. Part of getting to the end is also knowing when you're done. I mean, maybe that means the story is told excellently. You get to the end, you're like, oh, this story is great. I'm at the end. Maybe that just means you've taken it as far as you can take it. And it doesn't mean you can't come back to it. It does mean that you're moving on. You have to get to script number 2 and number 3. But you also have to finish your scripts. So starting lots of scripts doesn't make you a screenwriter. Finishing them does. Mistake number 9, writing only when you're inspired to write or when you feel like it. You know, one thing I've noticed in new writers is they want and need motivation. They want an emotional boost so they feel like writing, or they do lots of things to try to get themselves inspired to write. Like, ooh, I'm feeling the urge to write today, so I'm going to go do that. I know of 0 professional writers who write this way. All of them treat it like a job. I go to work, I write, I go home. There is no inspirational moments they're waiting for. They have deadlines, either self-imposed deadlines or because of a job they're on. It's something you do. So put your butt in a chair and do it. Maybe it's 30 minutes a day. Maybe you've got a couple of hours a day. Maybe it's every other day. I don't care. Find regular time, put butt in chair and write. But I don't feel like it. Well, too bad. Suck it up, buttercup. Get it done. If you want to be a writer, you write. Writers write. They don't wait for inspiration or do it only when they're feeling good. In fact, much of your best writing will come when you are a little emotionally raw. It puts your defenses down and lets you write what you need to for the story to work without you judging yourself for every single word. So no more waiting for inspiration. If you want to write, figure out a schedule and some deadlines and do it. Mistake number 10, thinking you're the exception. We saved a doozy for the end because most new writers will never admit this. I mean, if you ask a new writer, if I were to ask you, do you think you're the exception to other screenwriters? I mean, all of you are probably going to say, well, no, I'm not the exception. Any new writer is going to say that. But then they followed up by asking things like, but do I have to follow formatting guidelines? Why would you ask that? Unless you think you're the exception. Of course you got to follow standard formatting guidelines. Of course you do. You're not the exception. Okay, but do I have to, have excellent grammar? Well, who are you? The exception? Of course you have to have excellent grammar. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have sentence fragments, run-ons, other normal faux pas, but it does mean you need to check your spelling throughout. You should have terminal punctuation where appropriate, that everything is consistent in your script. Of course you do. Okay, but do I have to have a third act? Because my story, it doesn't really have a third act. Again, who are you? Of course you got to have a third act. Or did you forget about mistake number 6 and you just haven't taken the time to learn how a story works? So you think you can just lop off the end? Okay, well, but Tarantino and Sorkin break the rules and the accepted norms, so everybody can do that. Well, yeah, they do, but you ain't them. And what's worse is thinking you are actually makes it harder on yourself. I mean, people are looking for an excuse to pass on your script, especially because you're a new writer and haven't proven yourself yet. So why would you break formatting conventions? Not be nitpicky about your grammar, not even tell a complete story. I mean, you're making it easy for others to say no. Don't do that. Make it hard for them to say no, because you are showing you are playing within the normalized conventions, that you know what a story is, that you tell that story well, using the format and language and story structure to help you tell an excellent story. And if you're like, okay, Jake, I'm in, I get it. I'm tired of playing at the craft. I'm ready to do it. I want to help you. I do. And if you want to transform yourself into a better writer, but you don't yet know or feel confident in the fundamentals of screenwriting, consider joining the Screenwriting Fast Track. This is the screenwriting course I wish I would have had when I was starting out. It covers the fundamentals of story and storytelling, character building, scene building, screenplay format, a host of other things. If that's of interest to you, be sure to check that out. That link is below, Screenwriting Fast Track. Ultimately, I want to help you become a better writer and storyteller. And if you found any value and you haven't already, please be sure to like, subscribe, bell, all those things. I really do appreciate it. And when you go to tell a story, no matter how many mistakes you make along the way, because you're going to make them, it's totally fine. No matter how many mistakes you along the way, tell a story that matters. See you later.